Okay, in this video, I want to talk about the pre-Socratic philosophers, the people that led up to Socrates. I've already mentioned a little about them when I talked about the history of philosophy, but now I want to go into more detail. The first philosopher is that we know of is Thales, and most books will say he flourished, FL, around flourished 585 BC. The reason I say 585 BC is because Thales made a prediction of a certain eclipse, and astronomers know that that eclipse that he predicted happened in 585 BC. So that's why they'll say he flourished around 585 BC. So he was probably born, early around 600 BC, a little before. Thales is the beginning of philosophy. He's considered the first philosopher and the first scientist. What he was interested in is what is the world made out of? What is the world made out of? What he was looking for was, you look around the world, you see many, many different things. What Thales believed that there was unity to the world. Everything was made out of. There was one thing from which everything came. That was his belief. Okay, now, what he proposed was water. Everything is water. Well, that might sound kind of strange, but if you think about it, water. Some of the things he said was water comes down from the earth, flowers, plants, trees come up, so in a sense come out of the ground. So in some way, the flowers and the plants are water. Water comes down, plants come up. You dig down into the ground, you will hit water, usually in many places. The dry land comes to the end of the always dry land comes and it runs up against water. You walk out far enough, you'll hit the ocean, you'll hit a river or a lake. So what this 3/4 of our planet is water. He saw that living organisms need water to live. So anyway, that wasn't a bad guess. Everything is made out of water. Now, what was interesting about that is that he chose as the one thing that from which everything is made out of an element. There were 4 basically elements that people are aware of. There's earth, water, air, fire. He chose water. One of the things that's interesting about that is he's looking for unity. He's trying to look for an explanation of the world. He's not, as I mentioned before in a previous video, he's not appealing to religion, to mythology, to Homer. He's just using his reason and sense perception, right? He comes up with a hypothesis. That's basically what it is. It's a hypothesis. Everything is water. It's a guess. That's what a hypothesis is, and that's what he came up with, water. But one thing that's interesting about that is that by saying it's water, he introduces into philosophy a theme that will appear over and over again for the next couple thousand years: the distinction between appearance and reality, because it definitely doesn't seem like everything is made out of water. It doesn't seem that rocks are made out of water, that fire is made out of water. So seems like a very strange answer. But so appearance and reality. The world doesn't appear to be made out of water, but it is. Well, nowadays scientists tell us that the world is made out of atoms and molecules. That also, just by observation, you don't see atoms. I don't see any atoms or molecules. So appearance and reality. And his quest for unity. He was looking for a unifying principle. Actually, it turned out that was a very good guess. At least it was right on. I mean, the idea that everything is ultimately reducible to one thing. And we now know what it is. Scientists tell us that all matter, all material things, are ultimately different forms of energy. Just think of Einstein's E equals mc squared. So the unifying thing that unites everything is energy. Everything is made out of energy. But this idea that there's a unifying principle that underlies everything ultimately goes back to Thales. Thales had a student whose name was there's Thales and Anaximander. So Anaximander, he's the first example in history that we know of, the first example of a student who talked back to his teacher. He disagreed with his teacher. Thales said everything was water. Anaximander said that can't be, because it just seems that water, that air, that air and fire and earth are too different from water. So he didn't see any way in which the deserts in Egypt and so on could be made out of water. So what Anaximander said is that he suggested that everything is made out of the apeiron, A-P-E-I-R-O-N, which is translated as the unlimited or the indefinite. The indefinite. It's something that is not definite. It's not water. It's not air. It's not fire. It's some primordial stuff out of which all the elements are ultimately made: air, water, fire, earth. He called it the apeiron. That was Anaximander. Another thing is, and that was so that was actually an improvement over Thales, because scientists now know that earth, air, water, fire are not the fundamental principles out of which things come. One thing that was very interesting with Anaximander too is that whereas Thales believed that the earth floated on water, the earth was upheld by water. That's what Thales believed. He thought the earth was supported by water. And Anaximander said that can't be, because what's holding up the water? If the earth is held up by the water, the next question is what's holding up the water? And then if you say, well, something else, then you say, what's holding up that? So Anaximander was the first person to come up with a hypothesis that the earth is not being held up by anything. It's suspended in space. It's just floating in space. He didn't believe, though, that the earth was a sphere. He believed it was like a drum, because he believed the earth is flat. He thought we were basically living on the flat surface of a cylinder, suspended in space, nothing holding it up. That was a good guess. Very good. Okay, and then he had a student, or the next person came after. These all were part of it, and they lived in the same city, Miletus, off the coast of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. Miletus, they're called the Milesian philosophers because they lived in Miletus, off the coast of modern Turkey. And Anaximenes was the student of, so Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes. And Anaximenes said that everything was air. And, air, so whereas Thales said water, he said air. And air and water too, they can take on different forms. They can become more dense. Think of like vapor, and then that become water, that can become ice. So things can become more condensed or vaporized. And different. You could have a cycle. It changes. So change in quality. So air can take on different forms. So Thales said Anaximander said water. Anaximander said everything is made out of the apeiron, the unlimited. Anaximenes actually made a worse guess. He went back to looking for a single substance, and his guess was air. So these were formed, the first three philosophers, all the same school. That was basically the end of that school, called the Milesian school. So and then after these people, I'm going to go over a couple of other kind of pre-Socratic philosophers. Pythagoras, there was a philosopher called Pythagoras, and he believed he didn't believe that things were, the ultimate principle of things was material. He believed it was mathematical. So he believed that mathematics was the key to understanding the world. And that was actually a very, very good guess. It's probably the best one of all the pre-Socratics, because if you look at modern physics books and so on, all the descriptions of the world, it's all mathematical. E equals mc squared. You're constantly coming across mathematical formulas. So the world that we live in is described by mathematics, which is amazing because you wouldn't guess that. Einstein, said one of the things he said was that one of the most amazing things about the world, most incomprehensible things about the world is that it is comprehensible. It's not obvious why our mathematical, when a mathematician sits down in his office or her office and starts playing around with numbers and coming up with formulas, it's very hard to understand how those formulas can actually describe reality. But it does that. And that tells you, what that tells you is that the world really is mathematical. And over the academy, to Plato's academy later on, the sign over the entrance to Plato's academy is that no one enters here without knowing a geometry. So this idea that the world is mathematical is very important, and it became important for the rest of history. There was another two great philosophers before Socrates were Parmenides. Parmenides believed that all was one. He believed that everything was one. There was plurality, the difference. It looks like things are different. But Parmenides believed that difference and plurality is an illusion. So he's picking up on that idea of appearance and reality. The world appears to be made out of many things, but that's an illusion. The world ultimately for Parmenides is one, and change is an illusion. And then on the other hand, you had Heraclitus, who said that he took the opposite view. And Heraclitus believed that everything is changing, that there is no, he said that you can't one of his famous statements is, you can't step into the same river twice. Everything is constantly changing. For Parmenides, change is an illusion. For Heraclitus, change is all there is. And so he said he chose as what everything is made out of. He said it was fire. That is a very good choice for Heraclitus, because fire, think of a flame of a candle. That flame is constantly flickering, so there's constant change. And yet, Heraclitus believed that in the change, you also find a certain unity. The flame of the candle maintains its shape. It maintains the shape of a flame, but it's constantly changing. And he called that the part of the candle, or the part of reality that remains the same even while it's changing. He referred to that as the logos. So he believed that the philosopher or the scientist, because in that day, they were not distinguished, the philosopher was able to penetrate the change and see, even in the constant change, a certain unity. Okay? That was Heraclitus. So Heraclitus says everything is changing. You can't step into the same river twice. He says, and everything is conflict. He says the way up the path is the way down. Up, and the person who's old is the same as the person who is young. So reality is full of conflict. This idea of conflict became very important later, a couple thousand years later, for Hegel, and in the late 19th century for Nietzsche. Nietzsche loved Heraclitus. What Plato is going to do is he's going to combine Parmenides and Heraclitus and to synthesize them. So we'll talk about that when we get to Plato. So anyway, the ones I've talked about, I'll end this right now. I've mentioned Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, Parmenides, Heraclitus, and Pythagoras. And read about it in your book. You can read more about these. Okay, that's all for now. I'll talk to you later.